Negotiations between the United States and Iran have just finished in Vienna, where the negotiating parties have been meeting over the course of the weekend. Going into the negotiations, representatives of the P5+1 and Iran were both quite optimistic of reaching a comprehensive agreement to resolve tensions over Iran's nuclear program. Both sides thought that they could reach an agreement in which Iran would make substantial concessions regarding its nuclear enrichment capabilities and permitting IAEA inspections, and at the same time, the international community would provide significant sanctions relief. As the talks unfolded over the course of the weekend, it became less likely that a comprehensive agreement would be reached. However, Secretary Kerry said as late as Friday that it was likely that a framework agreement would be reached in which the parties would set out the broad area of principles which they agreed upon, and the technical details would be resolved over the next 7 to 10 days. What's emerged now at the end of the talks is that no such agreement of any kind has been reached, and that the parties have only been able to agree that they will reach a political agreement by March of next year, with technical details to follow by the end of June. There are three particular challenges to the timetable. The first is that it greatly vindicates the naysayers on both sides. So in the United States, Republican senators and congressmen have repeatedly said that the only way a deal of this kind is going to work is if more sanctions are brought to bear and there's a greater amount of pressure upon Iran. That's been significantly resisted by the White House, who said, give us time to bring these negotiations to fruition and you will see some progress. Progress has not been seen now, no significant progress of any real kind, and the Republicans take control of the Senate and the House starting in January, so they'll be in a position to pass new sanctions legislation which would likely scupper any chance of a deal. At the same time, you have hardliners in Iran who've been saying the negotiations are futile, they won't result in significant sanctions relief, and that we need to continue with the nuclear program as it is and not give in to the Western powers. They too will be greatly emboldened by the developments, because they will say, we've undertaken negotiations in good faith, we've not received any major sanctions relief, it's time to walk away. And lastly, you also have parties in the region, the Israelis and the Saudis, neither of which are countries who are keen on the deal. They will say that the recent developments proves that any accord of the kind that had been envisioned going into these talks simply is a mirage. The significance of today's events, crucially, is the amount of time the negotiators on both sides seem to think that they will need to reach an agreement. It had been discussed that only a few days more might be needed, but now we're talking a question of months. This shows that the parties are actually much further apart than was previously understood. Three main issues seem to be dividing them. The first is the number of centrifuges that Iran will be able to keep in place once its nuclear status has been formalised. The second is the sequencing of the sanctions. The Iranians appear to have been under the belief that instant sanctions relief would be provided as soon as an agreement was struck. That was ruled out by President Obama, who said that any sanctions relief would have to be unfolded over time as Iran met the new commitments that would form part of the deal. And the third area in which the parties are still far apart is over the role that the IAEA will play in inspecting Iranian facilities to make sure that its nuclear program does indeed remain peaceful. Iran's resisted a lot of technical and specific IAEA requirements, and whilst the parties are apart on that particular issue, the chances of a final agreement seems far off. There's still time between now and December. November 24th was always a self-imposed deadline by the two parties, so they still have some time to negotiate, and all of the diplomats who've come out of the meetings in Vienna have said that the negotiations will carry on starting in December. However, they are up against a very tight deadline. Whilst November 24th was a self-imposed deadline, by the time the Republicans take control of Congress in January, that will provide a very strong external reason for why the talks will start to struggle.